work and life.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Yeah,
Hey.
we are probably live now. Welcome to our panel about the elusive truth in game and narrative design. And we have a group of experienced narrative designers here, from experience varying from little indie artistic games to huge AAA experiences. And I think that I hope this will be an interesting panel. We have some things we know we want to discuss, but if you have any question, just ask us. So let's start with something big. When we say that the story is true, we can mean different things. We can mean it's factually accurate, or is inspired by real events, or is like feeling true. So what is your personal take on truth in games?
Wow, that's
yeah.
a question. I mean, yeah, because it goes to the heart of what do we mean by true? Is it factually accurate, like we were talking about before, or does it mean inspired by real events? I mean, I think to a certain extent, being able to tell a good story is being able to draw on some personal experiences, at least to inspire what you're doing, to create believable human characters that we can connect to, even if it is in the most far out game worlds. So there has to be elements of truth in order to sell a good fantasy or a good, new weird supernatural setting, if that makes sense. So
I once I stumbled on a screenwriting advice, but I think it's pretty universal, that said that if a story is personal enough, it becomes universal. So, yeah.
I think a lot of that has to do with being clear about the themes, because games, perhaps more than other media, let us investigate the human condition more deeply, because we're asking people to participate, to interact with these worlds and through these characters that we're providing, who have journeys to go on and new worlds to discover. And more recently, I think games are moving towards more complicated human emotions, like revenge and forgiveness, perhaps in The Last of Us 2, or what does it mean to be human in Detroit, or, all of these big universal questions that, we all like to delve into as storytellers.
And guys, what are your approach to truth in games?
Okay.
So I'd say truth is more or less what you make it, because a thing like Brooke, you were saying about like personal experiences, I found that my personal experiences are quite tame compared to the lifestyles of the characters that I'm writing. So I find that you can take like a personal experience as a starting point, and then you maybe turn it up to 11, and thus you are making it a bit more intense and a bit more clear cut, which is probably something that I found works a little better in the medium, where the subtlety is often lost in between the gameplay and the UI and all the different elements of the game. And I think so. Like the basis of it is true, but a lot of it, like the whole wrapping of the experience, may be made up, or just flow naturally from the setting of your games. So is that true enough, or is it not true anymore because it is not like based? So this is very relative. I find in saying that this story is super true, or something is It's a whole different beast if you just take real experiences as a basis, which is, I guess, natural to do because I think we as humans have maybe a hard time thinking, like trying to get in the shoes of somebody who is not us. And so if you look at all the science fiction aliens and things, they are all very much like us. And like anthropomorphized animals, I don't know, Animal Farm, all this stuff. The animals are also like archetypes of humans. We use all of those devices really to tell stories about our own selves or our species or something. So I guess all of the stories are true in a way because of that.
You said that you take your personal experiences and turn them up to 11, and that's what I heard once, that if you want to make something that looks believable in a game, you should take how it is in real life and make it like 2 times bigger. That was an advice about level design and designing like points of interest on the map. But I think it also might be slightly about showing experiences. Like, as you said, subtlety is sometimes lost in games. So maybe sometimes we just have to show something very clearly for it not to get lost.
Or not be afraid of slowing down briefly for us to breathe and feel those moments. Like, I think sometimes as game developers, we really want to keep players engaged, and so we think engagement, or it can be easy to think engagement equals more combat or equals more spine-chilling, adrenaline-pumping moments, when in fact they can be a moment of silence between characters, or things like that can have an emotional punch as much and still hold narrative tension, but without conflict manifest as conflict physically.
Yeah. There's like those moments of high adrenaline in a story, and those moments that require low adrenaline, like for them to sink in. But Sławek, you haven't.
At this point, I'm not sure if I can add anything really meaningful after what my colleague said. But for me, for me personally, the truth in storytelling, it's a tool for telling the most believable lies, the most believable fantasies. I always try to mix, as much of a true events, something that had happened in the world before. The story I have heard or read somewhere, twist it, and put it inside my own story. So in this way, I hope maybe it comes out as a more believable thing.
So the best lies are those that are based around a grain of truth. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I would say like a whole bunch of grains. The more, the more truthful.
Yeah. Okay. So why do we need truth in games?
Well, because what else do we connect to? You know what I mean? Like, I think at the heart of any piece of fiction or something that you're creating, you have to make it enjoyable to be in, believable for that situation. I mean, you could have the most unbelievable world, but if we connect to the characters, even if they are anthropomorphized, like you said, or anything, like at the end of the day, there's characters who want things for human reasons. And they don't have to be very attractive reasons either. They can be selfish reasons or things like that. But we still kind of understand what it's like to be selfish. So if we can hook on to some elements of truth, or even, I would believe that characters would behave like this in this situation. I think maybe I'm touching on believability, maybe, which is slightly different, but truth is a part of weaving that believability. Yeah. And that emotional investment, perhaps.
Yeah.
Hmm.
The thing that I like to avoid when I work on games is, or what I fear is that the player sits, like starts the game and says, "Oh, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
I don't believe it."
Mm.
It's nothing I can relate to. It's nothing that is interesting for me. I just don't believe like the story, the setting, the character.
Mm.
And so probably that's exactly like I agree with you. Oh yeah, I
Okay.
agree with what you've said.
I have one thing. I
Mhm.
think this like grain of truth may also be kind of a trap, because if you build a lie and it has a grain of truth in it, or like a couple grains, but you can easily discern which part is real, which part is made up. I find that if the viewer, the player, or the reader, whatever fiction you're writing, can see through the deception, then they don't believe. They see the trick that you were trying to pull. Oh, this is like your personal experience maybe, and this is all made up. So if you can sort this out, the illusion falls apart, in my opinion. So if you have like a completely made up world, and you have characters who are supposed to be like relatable, etc., and you can see that, oh, the writer was trying hard to make the character relatable, but they're like torn apart from the rest of their condition of the world that they are in. They don't relate to the world that they're in. Then
Yes,
you can see
but
that
is it?
it's a problem. For instance, if I may give an example outside of the games, like was like Prometheus, the film was that to me. You had characters who were like taken straight out of just our contemporary times, like a bunch of hipsters and whatever put on a spaceship, and you had this giant, amazing spaceship with this alien planet and everything, and they did not belong in that setting. And to me, that like destroyed it broke the movie completely from the.
Yeah, but was it a question? Was it a problem of using through experiences, or was it a question of a tool set, of a craft? Like maybe it was just badly done.
Yeah, for me it was just badly written. I mean,
but
who could
isn't this
believe
like
in
the case?
scientists who did all the stupid things?
Not dissing Prometheus in particular. Just talking about like such type of experiences that I see the rift between a true element and a world. If you see the rift, I think it's a matter of craft. It's just not well done, in my opinion.
But that's the crux of the problem, isn't it? Like,
well,
if you can do it well, then you can do it well, and there's no problem. If you cannot do it well, how do you do it well?
well, learn, get good.
I think that game development as such has a lot of pit traps in terms of storytelling and truth. I mean, it's way easier to do some bad writing, but maybe not writing. Writing can be good, but sometimes the game itself drifts away from the writing because a lot of decision is made at gameplay level, level design and art and everything. People don't talk enough about how it should be done in the team, or they plainly ignoring one another. And from really good intentions and not that bad writing, you can end up with a horrible story because it doesn't match the truth of the game itself.
Yeah. Okay. And do you have any personal experiences with games that were, or have parts of that were inspired by something real, like real places, real events, real situations, tackling real world problems? Do you have any experience of this sort?
On The Gardens Between, which is a game that I was a narrative designer for, it's about a childhood friendship. And a part of figuring out that story, the team, we all sat in a room and exchanged stories about childhood friends and things we did as kids in order to have these nostalgic sort of iconic moments that people could relate to, but also to find out what is specific and true to this particular friendship. Because I mean, it's all well and good for us to say we want to talk about childhood friendship, but we have to talk about what is meaningful between these two specific characters. And so we talked about anything. We talked about the fact that, you know, as much as we like to look back and say childhood was the best years of our lives, there are childhood friendships that can be quite painful and turbulent. And sometimes there are people who are your friends when you're kids and then suddenly they're not there, or they've gone, or you have some sort of fight about something and then you never speak to that person again. But childhood friendships are also, at least for all of us, we identified, we had such clear memory still of these people who we were friends with in the past, and we talked about if they were still part of our lives or not. And so that was a really important part of the idea generation for that game, is to draw on personal experiences, because at the end of the day, we wanted to tell a personal story and something that didn't sugarcoat friendship in this ball of idyllic nostalgia. We wanted to be truer than that. We wanted to say sometimes childhood friendships are kind of mixed with a bit of pain and kind of uncomfortableness. And it's a bit of a bittersweet story because of that. So we were pretty specific about using our own personal experiences there as one example that I have.
Sławek?
Well, sadly, no. I mean, yeah, all games I worked on were, you know, pretty fictionalized. Well, so even if, well, let's say Shadowrun 1 was set in the real world at the beginning, it drifted away so much from everything we know that there wasn't too much place to, you know, make it real, you know, sell some truths in there. Yeah, but I worked on some documentary movies about sporting events, maybe, and it was quite eye-opening, you know, to work with you know, real people to write about their stories and to try to make them documentary. But it's not a game, so.
You know, I have a question just to steer things up. You said, sadly, I didn't work on real-life inspired games, but
well,
but sadly, like, is it a value to do something that is real-life inspired?
I don't know if it is a value as such. It's sad for me because I think I want to right now. It's you know, it's quite an experience if I could work with a real life and real stories and to wrap, you know, the narrative around it. It would be refreshing, I think. So, but it's not like, you know, fiction is worse than a truth, than the reality. It's just different. It's, you know, to do something a little bit different.
Pavel?
So I haven't really worked on a game where I draw on much personal experience, not beyond like taking this basic pattern and then amplifying it out of proportion. About the question, is it like a value if you know, a story is based on real experience? Apparently the game, I haven't worked on it, but Sea of Solitude, there was the and that was apparently a game that was very tightly built around a personal story. And I think that maybe in the case of this game, the story is so obscure and like it has so many details which are apparently taken from the life of the person who was working on that story, and that it becomes obscured from the outside. Like you cannot really, you could maybe relate to the story, but it has so many fine details that you find odd and weird or unexplained, not really clear why they are there, that the story becomes kind of muddy and loses its impact in a way. So
yeah, that's a risk. Yeah, how to show something very personal, but in such a way that the player would understand the context. Yeah, of the situation, of the word, or of a picture.
And I think that Hellblade, on the other hand, I'm not sure if that was based on a real experience, but
it was consulted with
yeah,
many
but
people who
it
had
was
such
being
experiences.
consulted. So I found this to be a very impactful story because it was presented in a way that I could get literally inside the head of the protagonist and then live through her torment and see how it resolves in the end. And that felt like, okay, now I've lived it in a way, like in this cathartic kind of experience. And I think that's the difference in how the two stories were approached that really made or broke the story.
I had some experience with real life inspired games. I worked on Wanderlust. It was an interactive travel literature, sort of reportage, sort of travel log, travel book, and we worked with journalists and travelers. So we were sort of telling fictional stories set in real places. It is about tourist industry and stuff like this, and it was interesting because it was sort of part of journalistic work, like based on interviews and some articles and pictures and data gathering, like research on site, but still we had to find a fictional character to fit into this, like to carry the player through the experiences in an interesting way.
Yeah.
And right now we are working on a werewolf game that is inspired by the protests against the logging of Białowieża forest that happened 4 years ago. And it's a tough one. I'm a bit scared of the results because we are talking about real places and real and pretty controversial issue, and we are using werewolves to talk about it, and I'm really eager to see how it will work out.
There's a couple of things there that's really interesting. The first one is truth. Often the exact truth of what really happened doesn't necessarily make for a great story because fiction has a very clear causal chain of events that happen in order to have a satisfying story. Whereas if you can tell people about your day and craft that in such a way that it's a story, but there's no, like, if you try and just tell the events as they happened, that doesn't necessarily make for a good story. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It can go on forever. It can be too boring. There can be bits that are not paced well. And I think that's the challenge of a journalistic presentation of a true story, is to tell a story, but present true events. And then the other thing that I was thinking when you were talking is, if you are telling a true story, but using metaphors like werewolves, for example, there is almost a way that you can be more true with fantasy and science fiction using them as metaphor. Like Mouse, the comic, is a great example of talking about true events in a metaphoric way with animals, for example. I mean, Orwell's Animal Farm and things like that. These are all very true, real things that are presented in a fictitious way. So I think it's still possible to tackle true things.
And what I realized when working on such games, that there's probably not one truth. Like, the truth is such a subjective thing. It depends on our experiences, on what we see, what we hear. And we saw that because one of the stories was about a European who went to Bangkok, to Thailand, and it was like the city seen by an outsider, and it was written based on like many experiences of many people and on some books, and it was well researched. And then I had a chance to be in Bangkok, and I like walked the same and see the same places that the protagonist had, and I had this realization that their story were true, but I saw totally different places. I noticed totally different things, like I would describe it in a totally different way, and it was interesting. I'm not sure what to do with it, apart from like I don't know that maybe using like very specific things like colors and smells and tastes and very specific situations is a tool I can use to make something feel true.
Yes.
So yeah.
And then from a narrative design perspective, what out of all of that do you pick for the player to play? You know, for example, if I was going to tell a true story about one of my traveling adventures, I don't know, where I went back to Australia and said hi to my family or something, I don't know, some story about that. What about that would be interesting to play? You know, because then I would have to, and then what game mechanics do I have in that situation? Well, the emotional experience is actually about missing out on key moments that happen between your family members when you live overseas. And therefore the game mechanics might be about not having connections with these people that you used to. And so what mechanic is that? I'm not sure, like off the top of my head, but it's interesting then when you want to make that an interesting thing to play, what do you pick? So I think Papers, Please is a good example of a commentary on something that has set up a system of game rules and mechanics that teach you about the truth of that situation, which is that you make hard decisions. And that's what makes the game so hard and so heart-wrenching. Nina Freeman has also made some cool games that are very memoir and personal about, I don't know if you played Sybil, and it's basically about her forming a relationship with someone online by playing an online role-playing game. So part of the game, you're playing that game and listening to the characters talking to each other, but then you also get access to her personal computer desktop. That so how do you tell true stories, like memoirish type stories in games?
You opened a great topic about how games are different as a medium, and how we can use systems and game mechanics
to tell
a story and to, I don't know, to convince someone that something is true. Because if I make a system, I'm not really simulating reality. I'm explaining to the players what I think the reality is.
Yes.
So systems as a tool in speaking truth or telling convincing lies. What's your take, Sławek or Paweł?
Okay. So about create. The whole creating game is about creating realities. We first create reality, and the player is, when he's playing, she is playing, when they are playing, they know this reality is true. So, basically, whatever we throw at them at the beginning is conceived to be true. And, frankly, it's harder to tell lies, to show that reality is shifted, twisted somehow, than to convince players it is true. Because it's this fantastic world you are playing, and even if it is supposed to be simulation of a real world, it's not, and it never will be. That is my feeling. I never felt games as a real world in this sense that it's the world that I'm surrounded by, daily. It's always some kind of different. I can do things that I cannot. I can perceive things that I cannot. It, even the UI, it's kind of augmented reality, and in every and each game there is an UI, even if it's not an UI on screen when you are playing, walking, and looking at it at the first time. You have options you can change, and it is UI. So it throws you out from the game, from this reality. It shows you it's not the reality you experience every day. So well, for me it's harder to tell lies, to show the reality in its twisting on itself, because everything you show in the game becomes truth. Because you experience it
in the game world.
In the game world, of course, in the game world, not in the whole world.
Yeah, but you said because we experience it. Yes, it become, when I do something in game, it probably goes through the same parts of my mind, of my brain, as my day-to-day experiences. So it becomes part of my experience. So I'm always learning something when I'm playing, and that's what I meant by saying that you can use systems to spread your take on the truth. Yeah.
And often, sorry.
No.
I was going to say that's really interesting too, because you are setting up a truth, setting up a reality, setting up a simulation, inviting people in to believe it. And then what you can do as a storyteller is then uncover more of show that there are deeper systems and things going on in the world, either political systems and relationships, or literally game systems and mechanics that deepen the reality. But another thing that I was thinking of too is, yes, the truths of what players take away with them and tell their friends. So some games lend more to a personal narrative or personal truth about how they experience the game, which is really interesting. And be that any game, I think people take away different things. But the other thing about that is you could spin it the other way and say, I'm essentially, as a storyteller, telling you a whole bunch of lies in order to convey a truth. And I think a lot of really good stories know what they're doing, or know what their themes and their truth are, or they're tackling a question even. They're showing you different sides of the question and letting you make up your mind. Sometimes that's really nice. But then, yes, and then sometimes games really do call attention to their UI and to their systems to also be a bit meta and say, well, this is just a game, so that's interesting too. There's lots of different layers there, which is super cool. Did we just lose our... Oh, you're back.
Yeah. I think that my computer may have a little too little memory to to handle the awesomeness of this.
To handle the truth.
To handle the truth.
Yeah. So Paweł, what's your take on on using game systems to tell a story, to make a story feel true?
So I think it's a big challenge. It's an interesting, some games are really successful in just using systems like the Papers, Please that you mentioned, where the gameplay itself becomes the point of the story. And I think this is a great thing to do, but maybe it's not something that you would expect from every game. I guess when you approach a game, you're maybe in a mood for a certain type of storytelling. And sometimes you want something that is really meta and really the story is very much integrated within the game. And by playing the game, you're experiencing this narrative thing. But sometimes you just want watch a movie, but shoot some people while you're doing it. And that's where all the, linear Like when Bioshock is really good, for instance, because you have like a really nice tight story and you have a solid gameplay and maybe if you play it and you see the connection between your actions in the game and the story itself, you get this kind of that's pretty smart, and you like the story more. But does this make the story more immersive, or does it allow you to lose yourself in the world? I'm not sure. I think this is not necessarily like a must for a game to have this integration of story and mechanics. But the more games you play, maybe you start to realize some things, and some things that you didn't pay attention to before suddenly start to, rub you the wrong way. Like the question of Ludonarrative dissonance has been covered like all over the place. And does this make the Uncharted games, like the fact that you have this story of Drake and like he's just this regular dude, more or less, just a bit adventurous, and then you go into a level and you kill like 100 people, and without batting an eye, and then you move on to another cutscene, and is this really bad? I mean, it's like it's only bad if you don't like it, if you pay attention to it, if it really knocks you out of the experience. But it doesn't make
It's
that.
that depends. I think if you try to take in the game as something that is true, or if you can see it through a lens of a genre, because it's a genre that you shoot and kill people. It's just like a type of game. Yeah, it's a like a tool, a stylistical tool. Yeah, a tool to that this is a game when you tell a story by shooting people. Yeah, and if you can accept that, I think you will have fun. But if you think the game should like play out like the real life, or like my imagination of an adventure game, I might be like, the shooting may be too much for me. But I think it's about communicating between like the game and the player, like managing expectations, maybe setting the scene.
But that's where, I mean, as game developers, I would hesitate to guess that we could challenge ourselves a little bit, because there's only a certain small subsection of truths that we can present in all games where you shoot to kill people, and that's about it. If you know what I mean. Like, at the end of the day, if you're only offering one way to interact with a story, then there can only be a certain number of stories that can be told. So if you're thinking of telling a different kind of story in games, think about a different kind of mechanic, like a different way to interact. You could perhaps tell the same story by giving letters to people, or by tending their gardens, or by chasing a crazy goose around the place, or I mean, there are so many different mechanics that I would wager we haven't begun to investigate that could offer other truths that don't usually get to be spoken by people who don't usually get to tell their truth.
I just got this thought that that if we have a whole subset of games that are based around one interaction,
yes,
that is shooting, and I thought that there is another part of culture that shows a very specific subset of human interaction, and that can tell only one type of stories, and this is pornography. Like it's like, there is it's not the whole cinema.
No.
Like, maybe even, let's say, the most interesting stories happen outside of this genre.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's kind of the same how there aren't, I mean, at least in the AAA space, let's say, purely based romantic comedy games. Like, what kind of game mechanics would they have?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, and I mean, I guess that's eventually the way that games might have to grow, or perhaps could grow. I'm sure certainly a lot of indie games touch on a lot of more personal stories like that, I would say.
But it just shows how much in games, how much it is system related. Like how much systems.
Think about systems that you're picking. Even Hellblade, like, you have other things to do, like you're observing puzzles in the environment and lining things up. You're listening to stories told to you by lore stones and things like that. And every battle is not about wiping the floor with a bunch of people. It feels like a hard physical battle in Hellblade, and they've made a clear decision to make it permadeath as well. So everything feels quite significant. You don't feel like you're walking through this game hack and slashing your way through as a great victor like that.
But this is a story about struggle. Yes, so it makes sense that some of the systems is about struggle. But as you said, romantic comedy, I would play some romantic comedy. That's not visual novel.
You could have a
visual novel. Okay.
You could have a romantic comedy in a shooter. I'm pretty sure that could be done.
Quite possibly.
Well, yes, but would the shooting be the medium of the story? Would it be just something to skip over to get to the to the next parts of the story? That is the question. I don't know the answer. I'm just in this privileged position to ask questions. Okay.
Look, if you, for instance, if you take the Runaway Bride, it's a romantic comedy, right? And instead of the regular
the whole
wedding,
game, you just run away from people.
You put it in the setting of a shotgun wedding, and then to get out of that wedding, to run away from this, you need to shoot some people. Obviously.
You just have to run and make sure you get wedding cake on the way out.
Yeah, and then go into a car, and then you have this car chase sequence.
And the whole game is running and conversation mechanics.
Yeah, well, that's basically most of the shooters, but
Dream Daddy is a good example. Yes, someone in chat mentioned that game.
Okay.
But I think more it's just about thinking of different ways to interact could pave the way for different stories or truths. And I thought that was.
I think that's an important part of this panel. That's my feeling. This thought. That we need to explore more systems, to get to more kinds of stories.
You could also because if you have a shooter and the only thing that you're doing is shooting, if you set up the world and the setting in a way where shooting is the character's everyday life, because I don't know, for whatever reason why they might need to be shooting people all day long, then you can go beyond just the mechanics of the game and focus on the story, which goes completely sideways from the mechanics. And I think if you execute it right, it could totally work. That you don't maybe need this total integration between the shooting. Take Wolfenstein. This is the kind of thing I think what they did with the new games is, oh, you're BJ Blazkowicz, so you just kill Nazis. This is what you do. You do it every day. And this is just, another day at work. But on top of that, you have this whole big story about freedom and fighting for, liberating people. And you have love and friendship and all those themes, and it works. It works in the game.
Yes,
even though all you do is
but it's not disconnected from what you are doing in the game. The whole game is about fighting with Nazis, fighting for freedom, fighting for your friends, and all the topics are about fighting. It's not disconnected from what you are doing in game. You are doing this because you want to do this for freedom, for your friends, for everything you said, but it's not disconnected. Every piece of the story is connected to actually shooting people, shooting bad guys, shooting Nazis.
Yeah. I mean, another thing could be is you use the same mechanics, but you give them an entirely different narrative context. So, for example, in one of the side missions in Control, I mean, most of Control is shooting and Jesse using and gaining abilities. However, we have some cool stuff that we do with simple interacts, like Jesse talks to plants in one mission and waters them, and in the motel sequences, she can't shoot or use her abilities. It's about puzzling through the dream logic of the space. So you can also use very simple interact mechanics with an interesting kind of narrative context, gives them different meaning. So it doesn't even have to be an expense, really, at the end of the day, something you have to create a new mechanic for. It's just like, what else could I do with these mechanics, So that's a thing as well. So it doesn't have to be a new system, but you could give it a new context.
Okay, so the last topic. What is your... Let's look into our toolboxes. What are your tools, your tips and tricks, like for making a scene, a place, a character, a story bit believable? Like, what do you do to make sure that something feels, let's say, true or true enough, believable enough? How do you do it?
For instance, in dialogues, if I may start, I always try to do a lot of, maybe not a lot of, but some incidentals, like, people when they are talking, they are rarely talk, clearly like an actor. So if you include some of those, missteps in dialogues, they feel a little bit more true, a little bit more real. But, well, it's a thin line that you cannot cross, because if you add too much of it, it feels clumsy. So you must add, right amount of it.
I sort of kind of know what you were probably trying. Like, okay, so that was a natural dialogue that felt not good enough for a game, yeah?
Yeah.
I think you could extend that to if you're doing any mocap or stuff like that. If you can add like gestures which are not completely, don't look rehearsed, like somebody drops something and then picks it up immediately and does like those tiny clumsy things, or if they start doing something but are interrupted by something and they need to retake the same action, or that it's also a little bit makes it look a little bit more truthful maybe. But this is not something that I've been able to use a lot in the games I've been working on.
Yeah, because
theory than practice.
Because game production tends to be like, it's good to be optimal, like to make things that are optimal, and truth it's sometimes is suboptimal, like is mistake. And the other thing is that mistakes are memorable. So if my every pickup animation would include this misstep, it would look like a glitch. So I have to do at least 2 versions of the animation, and then the production budget comes in, and it's a tough balance.
Well, it's easier to do in cutscenes. In cutscenes you are directing them, so there can be these little missteps. I also like having actors in the same booth when they are talking to each other. It feels more natural or truthful. It sounds like a conversation, not lines that were sewn together.
Yeah, that's true.
What else comes into my mind is UI. There's quite a few games that can pull it right. Like, for instance, that Space, when everything that you saw was like augmented reality, but this augmented reality was part of the game world itself. It showed on the doors, on signs, on everywhere when you were looking at your menu, inventory or whatever. Isaac just pulled his hand and there was this hologram with everything that he got, and that that goes as far as to have like your options for video or sound or whatever be the part of the same holographic UI. So it blended the borders between reality and the game. The game was one big reality. So it's a great tool if done right.
Yeah, even if you can like make sure that your UI is voiced in a way that is consistent with the tone of the game, I feel that doesn't necessarily like immerses you in the game, but it makes you think, oh, they took care of that as well. This is like a detail. If it's consistent, then it feels like the whole narrative is more solid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A couple of things jump to mind. Often, I think from the narrative side, it's about being able to convey really clearly what the story is, what the themes are, what the characters want, and why they're motivated for human reasons to get them. Because at the end of the day, we're just one part of the development team, and if other people really have like internalized the story for the game we're making, I mean, this was especially important for Control because it was a kind of a very nuanced genre that we're hitting, a new weird genre. That if the team can internalize that and feel inspired by it, then the truth of that will inspire their work, and they will often think of amazing things that us in the narrative department wouldn't have dreamed of, and help that world be more true. For example, our world design director is very keyed into narrative, and our art director, and everyone's thinking about how to make this world feel convincing. And narrative, as a narrative designer, a lot of my work too is communicating that to the team and making sure they understand, and help and giving them like explanations of the narrative mood and talking to them about how we convey that, or what Jesse's feeling at the time, or what this space is supposed to feel like and what its purpose is in the larger story. So there's that, and I agree that when you put actors together, the dialogue can sound even better. And even the other thing I was thinking about too is you can do it cheaply, but having the game in some way acknowledge the actions that the player makes in the game, and not necessarily from a choice-based thing, but for example, in Control a little later in the game, people are starting to know who Jessie is and what she's been doing around the oldest house. So you feel like you're making an impact in the game, even if it's just one line somewhere about something, so you can do that with dialogue, but also show that in the environment in some way. So they were some things that jumped to mind for me, just off the top of my head.
I love when games are appealing to senses other than like to senses like smell or temperature. That like when a scene creates an illusion that appeals to more than my like visual. I don't know. It's easier with the text. Yeah, when I'm writing a scene, and I work on text games a lot recently, so I try to include tastes and smells and like temperature, stuff like this, like to ground the scene like into my body experiences. And sometimes in a game there's this combination, in other games when there's this combination of animations and sounds and colors that suddenly causes me to feel warm or cold, or understand that something smells bad or something is tasty. When a game does this, I always remember the scene more, and it suddenly everything seems more believable to me. Like it for me, it radiates on the rest of the story. Like those little like anchors, like sensual anchors, like make the whole story more believable for me. So that's the trick I like as a player and as a designer. And I think we are like 5 minutes to the end of the panel. So if there are any last like messages, last words we want to say to our listeners, or if there are any questions from the public, we would love to quickly answer them.
One note. If there is anyone out there who attended or saw my talk and didn't get a chance to ask a question, feel free to tweet it to me because I was unavailable at the Q&A. So please feel free to do that after. And thank you for coming along to this panel. And it would be great to hear if you have any questions about narrative design and the truth.
Yeah.
The truth of narrative design.
And as I'm reading the chat, many people mention moments where a game started behaving like a game, like when a game surprised me, like someone apologized, an NPC apologized for what they've done, or something unexpected happened. I thought that there was a set of rules, and then I understood that the rules are more complex, and it was a moment, wow, of enlightenment. So maybe breaking, like not being schematic, like not if we are able when making a game to think that we are telling a story and not just making a game. Maybe that's something that creates those memorable moments, like the breaking of the routine.
I think it's also timing. If you can like get something that is really appropriate for the moment, and the game suddenly reacts to it, like the example from The Last of Us, where the character is apologizing, but even like tiny bits, like it was, I think, in Rise of the Tomb Raider, if you jumped in the water and got out of the water, then Lara would like, ring her brake to get the water out. And this was like, yeah, of course, this is such a natural movement. So it really made it more believable, just this tiny one tiny.
Yeah, it almost made you believe that the game was made by someone who was wet, like who once in their lifetime got wet. And it was not optimal. It was it felt natural,
but it felt natural. So I think if you can find this, like a moment like that, and maybe even like hard scripted there, so it happens once in the game, but just at the
it
right
will be
moment,
remembered.
It will be remembered. It will be memorable. But if you can make this systemic, then wow.
Okay, so it seems that we need truth to make games believable. We need truth to build very convincing lies around the grains of truth, but we have to be careful because too much truth can like maybe spoil the experience, or maybe is not what everyone expects. And but it seems that we all have moments when we reach to our personal experiences to add it to even the most fictional game or setting or character, and those little details that are maybe superfluous, maybe not optimal, but they can make like a game more memorable and more believable. So I think that's the takeout from it. It was a pleasure for me to talk with you all.
Same.
And
thank you very much.
Thank you for coming to this panel, and thank you to our lovely audience. And because the chat was really I had problems with focusing on the panel sometimes because the chat was really interesting as well. So
awesome.
Thank you all, and thank you for the Digital Dragons to having us here this year.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Excellent. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's leave. Yeah. Bye.
I don't know how it's gone.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.